Hello, everyone. I'd like to talk to you today about some lessons I learned from my father about how we deal with life and whether we show up as a victim or as somebody who thrives and who manifests. So, a little background information about my father, real important for you to know, is that my dad was a Holocaust survivor. He grew up in Poland, and when he was about, I'm guessing around 10 years old, the war started there. Our family is Jewish. And it was 1942 or 1943, the year that he turned 13, which could have been his bar mitzvah age. Their family had to, among many others, had to leave their town in Poland, and they hid in the woods for 14 months. Now, most people think of Holocaust survivors as people who went through the concentration camps, but that is not true for everybody. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people who lived under very different circumstances during the war. So my dad's family was in the woods. It was him, his parents, two brothers, and a sister. And unfortunately, my grandmother, for whom I'm named, died in the woods. It's a very sad story, but the family was recovering from typhus, and it was springtime, and everybody was strong enough to leave this underground bunker that they were hiding in to go look for food, which could have been a potato in some farmer's field. And what happens in the springtime is that the ground starts to thaw. And by the time they came back, the bunker had collapsed on her and she was buried alive. And I'm named for her. So I really feel kind of honored to have that legacy behind me of people who did their best to survive. And eventually they did go back to their town. You know, there were times when the Russians came through and then the Germans came through and then the Russians came through again. But as you can imagine, living in bunkers underground, running, hiding for over a year has got to take its toll on everybody. After the war, the family spent 4 years in something called a displaced persons camp, a DP camp. And this was a place, excuse that background noise, that's my printer resetting itself. They were in this camp for 4 years and did not come to the United States until 1949. By that time, my father had learned some English. He fortunately was able to come to this country with the rest of his family intact, his father, two brothers, and a sister. And what is so remarkable to me is that people can live through horrors like that. And don't kid yourself, those things are happening every day all around the world. Not the same, but similar circumstances, that people can live through a nightmare, come out of it. And yes, I have no doubt that they carry the trauma with them all their lives. And yet they can start again. Every member of the family, except for my grandfather, who was already elderly at that point, got married, had children, supported themselves and their families, and raised really great human beings. And yes, I count myself as one of those great human beings. Living with my dad was not easy sometimes. He was a good man, a really good man, but he could be difficult to be with sometimes. And of course, that took its toll on me. I'm somebody, I consider myself this new designation of HSP, highly sensitive person. So I took everything as the truth. And when you're a very sensitive child, you don't realize that people are sometimes reacting from emotion and from their experiences. And that kind of clouded my relationship with him for a long time. But I learned so much from him about rebuilding and just showing up in your life. And when I say that he was a manifester, I don't mean that he was somebody who had huge dreams about manifesting $1 million business and living in the biggest house in the nicest communities and driving the most expensive cars. He was a manifester because after what he lived through, he created a life. I'm sorry, it still gets to me sometimes. He created a life, he manifested something beautiful when he could just as easily have given up hope and said, what is this all for? It means nothing. But he didn't. And he became a member of his community, primarily his religious community, super active in his synagogue. He was just a constant presence there. When he died in 1995, I heard so many stories from people about how he motivated them and inspired them to just get things done, whatever it was, or to just try something for the first time. Yeah, and it's always been inspiring to me. That's what I wanted to share with you today, that you can be a victim of your circumstances and of your situation, or you can be somebody who finds a way to thrive and to have a meaningful life, regardless of what your past experiences are. And I feel like I've taken that, because we all have stories, right? So I've taken that as well. My husband and I, we've been married, yikes, 40 years already. We've been through infertility and adoption and issues with parent. And he has, everybody has some kind of issue with their parents somewhere along the line. And so he's had his share. And then we've had other things that have gone on with our kids over the years. And yet we've each found ways to contribute to the world that we live in, to our extended families, to our friends. So I just encourage you, when life seems really tough and overwhelming, you can have a life regardless of the circumstances that you find yourself in. You can contribute, you can find meaning, satisfaction, and purpose, even when things look darkest. So I hope that's some inspiration for you on this Friday. And it's not to say that you compare yourself to anyone else and say, well, my story wasn't as bad as that, so what am I complaining about? No, everyone has experiences that imprint on their lives. Every one of us, for better or for worse. Whatever it is, whatever you consider to be a challenge in your life, it doesn't have to define your whole life.